All right. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel. I'm really excited to have today's guest with me, Dr. Shawn Baker, who I would be very shocked if you don't know who he is, but I think many of us came to carnivore because of Dr. Baker. So yeah, Dr. Baker, welcome to the show.
Well, sir, thank you very much. You can call me Sean. That's fine. I've been called a lot worse, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm glad to talk to you and your audience.
Thank you. Well, before we jump into anything, I want to talk a little bit about the trial that you're doing. I'm going to link below so people can contribute to that. But I heard this morning you were up to about $134,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's as of earlier this morning. That's right. Yeah. So just to, I guess, elaborate on that. So we are going to be doing a clinical trial, an intervention trial. So there's actually a study in progress right now at Harvard University by David Ludwig and Belinda Leonards, which is more of an observational study that, we recruited from this community, the carnivore community, to kind of enter their 6-month data, or their people that had been doing it for 6 months, kind of before and after, see how they're doing overall. But that's not the same thing as a clinical trial where you actually have an intervention. So we're going to be taking a group of people that have never done the carnivore diet, that are sick in some way, and we're still figuring out what our primary endpoints and some of our secondary and tertiary endpoints are going to be, and put them on a carnivore diet for X period of time, compare them against another group that doesn't get the carnivore diet, that's essentially starting at the same position, and then checking the same endpoints and seeing who does better. And so it'll be nice to see, one, safety, because we want to make sure that it's a diet that people aren't dropping dead on, because we hear a lot of concerns about your colon's going to fall out, or you're going to have a heart attack, or you're going to get scurvy or something else. And so we'd like to more rigorously demonstrate that those things, hopefully they're not true, but we're going to put it to the test. And then so we are, I've talked to just a whole bunch of researchers, a bunch of clinicians about what they're seeing in their carnivore patients, what endpoints are likely good markers to look at to test to see we're going to see some movement there. And then we're talking with, again, individual researchers and contract research organizations which do clinical trials. I'm not doing the trial. I'm not a researcher. I'm not going to pretend I am. I'm just helping to fund it, to help it get done. It'll be done. It'll be turned over to professional researchers, as we'll do that in an unbiased fashion. And then, have to recruit patients. We would like to do a robust, very strong powered trial, which means lots of people, which unfortunately means lots of money,
Yes.
which is a hard part. So it's just trying to get the funding for that. And so we're very, very pleased up to this point that people have been willing to, kick in, a few bucks here and there, and every little bit makes a difference. And so hopefully we'll get this done. People ask me, can they be participants? And I said, well, maybe, but it's going to be a while. Once we get it funded, then we have to contract with whoever we're going to have to work on it, and then, recruit patients. So we're probably many, many months away from launching it. So if you want to wait, but I tell people, don't wait, fix your health instead. We will find, there's plenty of people that are sick out there. And, like I said, we can find a lot of obese pre-diabetics and diabetics, and there's no shortage of them. So
That's for
I'd
sure.
rather you not wait for the clinical trial and just go get healthy today.
I agree. And I love that you've created MeatRX, that it's such an amazing experiment and just this project that you have, because I feel like every single day, I don't think what people, they don't realize about what you're doing is that every single day you're talking with people in the community and hearing from them the benefits that they've had on the carnivore diet. And but also on the flip side of that, you've heard of people that need help and with the troubleshooting. So tell me a little bit about how that has just really affected the way that you look at this whole thing.
Yeah, so obviously there's no really one size fits all. I would argue all humans are pretty well designed to eat meat. I think we're all broken in different ways. And so how we eventually heal ourselves, obviously I think animal nutrition is a very essential part of that. Now, one of the things that, I have the pleasure to do, and it's really literally the favorite part of my day, 7 days a week, every single day, whether it's Christmas, New Year's, my birthday, your birthday, 4th of July, it doesn't matter. I'm in there, except if I'm on a plane. That's the only time I've missed. But every single day, I make sure I'm there available for the meeting. We usually have 50, 60, 70, 80 people in there. We share information. I ask people what's going on, and we start to see some patterns emerge for certain people, what seems to work better for them. And, we'll get into high fat, low, high fat, high protein, different strategies, different food, different things impact that. And what we're going to do, particularly as we grow this community, it's growing very nicely, we're going to add some machine learning algorithms to that. So that's part of the thing, is so people will be able to enter their data. We'll come back, and as we collect enough data, we'll start to see patterns emerge. And we can say, hey, you need to maybe tailor your diet this way, or you need to do these types of things. So we're going to really aggressively use some machine learning models to really dial in the AI, or the lifestyle, which includes diet and a whole bunch of other things, whether it's sleep, whether it's exercise, light exposure, all those things. So we're going to really look into, using this, again, as a membership grows more and more, the more data we have, the better we can sort of tailor those things. So that is sort of the next step in the evolution. And my partner in this MeatRX is a machine learning data scientist who is very, very skilled in this stuff. And so we're going to, that's one of the things we've got on the schedule coming up in the near future. We've got an app coming out that'll be something people can use to enter the data. That's going to be kind of preliminary stuff to start getting the ball rolling in that direction. But I think that, like we all experience, it can be very simple. Some people need a little more support, and they have to adjust things a little bit. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I've never been dogmatic about it. I said, we've got to figure out what works for you, and don't think it's my way or the highway. And so I think that's a important aspect. It just differentiates us from some of the other dogmatic beliefs about, I'll use like the vegan diet, which is obviously ideologically driven.
Yeah.
And, if you have a molecule of an egg, you're all of a sudden an apostate, awful person. Whereas we don't treat it that way. It's like whatever is going to work for you. And these are the common findings. And we're making some progress. It's been really interesting that I've seen in my evolution and thinking, seeing certain conditions respond better certain ways, and certain people responding better to different sort of variations, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. And I love now, and I'll definitely link your channel below this. I'm sure people who are subscribed to my channel, obviously, are probably subscribed to yours, but you've been live streaming a lot of the MeatRX meetings, just a few minutes of it, so people can kind of get a taste of what it is that you guys do in there. And I have a MeatRX membership. I've had one for a while. So it's fun to kind of go in there and, get to see you interview different people in the community. And then just to hear people, like I heard one in particular was probably about a month ago with a guy that had a major weight loss stall and started to see his A1C go up. And you were like, okay, let's try this. Let's see if we can up your fat a little bit and drop that protein back and see if it gets you through the stall and helps drop that A1C down. And he had a pretty serious history of metabolic disorder. And so it's cool to hear you, talk to the individual members and say, well, let's just try this and then report back. Let me know how it goes. So it's like this continuing, this evolving thing that I think is just so helpful to help people get to the bottom of their health, that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the problems we have with healthcare in general these days, and I often kind of refer to it as a disease management or disease maintenance system, quite honestly, because we don't really get to the bottom of things. And I think the problem is we have this top-down model where, it's really pharmaceutical companies direct it. They're like, well, this person has a disease. We're gonna do some symptom management. Basically, we're gonna create a drug for that, and then we're gonna funnel it down to the individual or the different medical organizations, American Heart Association, American Diabetes, whatever. They'll funnel it down to those guys, and then they'll funnel it down to their expert medical doctors, who will funnel it down to the rest of the doctors, and then the drug reps will be in there, and then eventually it gets to the patients at the bottom. And that produces, I'd say, at best, modest results, and probably a lot of really people that really are poorly served by that. It does a good job at enriching the people at the top, the pharmaceutical,
Mm-hmm.
CEOs and board members and stuff. But I think a better model, particularly when it comes to lifestyle stuff, is starting at the bottom and working from the bottom up. And then so we can kind of figure out, taking all this data from people and, again, applying some of this wonderful machine learning we have, and then creating algorithms that work for people for different, because I can see we have a bunch of people with psoriasis, and they all kind of say these things work, and then with time, with enough numbers, you'll start to see what things really work. And if you can incorporate the data, and the nice thing about the machine stuff is it gets better with time. The more input you have, the better it is at predicting what is going to happen and what's the best way to go forward with that. So I think that's really a better way to do things in my view. But that's it's a little shift in the paradigm,
Well,
and I think
I mean,
we're
I honestly couldn't agree more. I feel that a lot of people that are out there, especially kind of these internet doctors who maybe have a big following, and they have a lot of people who just kind of hang on to every single word that a lot of these guys are putting out there. They aren't working one-on-one with people the way that you are. And that's one thing I have emphasized on my channel over and over again, just even within the carnivore and keto space, is like, hey guys, be careful who you're listening to. Are these people that are up here spouting off studies every other sentence actually working one-on-one with people and watching them recover their health? Or are they just trying to keep on spouting off studies and sounding smart and financially motivated in some way? Like, we got to think critically here. So yeah, I'm a big supporter of what you do.
Well, I mean, I'm very fortunate in that I am able to see hundreds of people almost on a daily basis. I mean, it's like most physicians, you might see 10 and 15 a day, in a rush clinic, but I see a lot of them over and over again, but I do think it's an advantage, and I'm very much results oriented. I can read the science. I understand much of the science. I understand it enough to know that, it's very, very nuanced. And, whenever you pick a particular hill to stand on and you say, well, it's got to be this way,
Yeah.
there's thousands of different interactions that go with that you have to realize it's much more nuanced and complicated than when it seems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, speaking of, I'm kind of curious about your whole journey. I've watched you do different things within the carnivore lifestyle. I think when I first started following you, you were eating, pounds and pounds of meat and doing a leaner version of carnivore. And then just probably over maybe like the last, you did like a high fat experiment for a few months. So I just wanted to kind of hear from you from both sides, what you experienced with those different approaches.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, I probably ate a lot of a lot of steaks for about 3 years, and kind of quite honestly, I was fine with that. As I got to sort of what I'm doing more and more with different people, I kind of I broke my world records, I achieved what I wanted to do, and so now I'm kind of just experimenting with different versions, see what it does for me personally, but also because I do deal with so many people in different situations. So I want to have some of that personal insight into, what's going on in addition to reading. Cause I mean, I literally read, study after study, most days I'm reading 5, 10 studies and I'm looking at and trying to assimilate some of the stuff and kind of bring some thought to this. And then, sometimes we guinea pig that out to the community, said, hey guys, try this sort of stuff. And so, I was, I went and got really, really lean. I was at a point where I was like, I'm not so much as interested in athletic performance, so I'm going to do some aesthetic stuff. And so I ate very, very lean for a while, and I got lean. I mean, it worked for me, but I didn't find that was something I was going to be able to sustain over the long haul. I just it's just kind of the same old kind of calories in, kind of calories out type of thing. And so then, like I said, as I mentioned, we have a lot of diabetics in the group that we're dealing with, type 1s, type 2s. Some are pretty brittle diabetics. I was looking back in the literature and looking some of the literature, what they did before they had insulin, and trying some of that stuff. And one of the approaches was a very, very high fat approach, which was actually calorically restricted as well. And just looking at my own blood glucose numbers, and I saw it just this plummet to the lowest numbers I've ever seen in my life. And this is something, there's a guy at the University of Michigan in the 1920s named Louis Newberg, who ran these experiments on diabetics, and it was a low calorie, it was like 1,000 calories, 90% fat for a week or two, and it would get them, these people that were the worst diabetics on the planet. I mean, these guys were septic. I mean, they had all kinds of infections. They had blood sugars in the 600s, just in comas just about. And he would take them within a week and normalize their blood sugar, which I thought was just fascinating. So I said, well, I'll try this. And I wanted to see how hard it was to do. And surprisingly, it was relatively easy. I mean, now, side effect was that I lost weight. I went from 4,000 calories a day to 1,000 calories a day, which a lot of people think, well, you're crazy. Why would you do that? But again, I just wanted to experience that. And so that was actually fairly sustainable for me, except I didn't want to continue to lose weight. So I've recently continued with a higher fat approach, but just upping the calories quite a bit. So now I'm back up around that 4,000 calories a day mark, eating still probably 80% of my calories coming from fat. So I'm still getting, 200 grams of protein a day, which is still quite a bit of protein, but it's because I'm still training pretty hard. But I'm still doing the majority of my calories coming from fat and, maintaining, a pretty good degree of leanness. I mean, I wasn't as super shredded as I was on super lean, but I mean, at the same time, I mean, I'm just like, I can't.
You're so
Yeah.
lean already.
Well, I mean, but I didn't want to be starving all the time. I
Yeah.
mean, this is a thing, I was at night just sitting there, man, I'm really hungry. I'd really like some fat,
Yeah.
and I was doing it in a way where I was doing fat refeeds. I was still getting fat every 4 or 5 days, but that lean, that really, real lean. And when I mean really lean, it was probably 70% protein, 30% fat, which is,
Oh, wow.
it's pretty hard to do. I mean,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
not easy, even to find, unless you're just eating like pure shrimp and chicken breast and, white fish. If you have any red meat in there at all, it's hard to get meat that's lower than, gosh, 40%, 30% fat is pretty hard to do with red meat. So,
Did you
so that's,
notice?
that's kind of what, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, did you notice anything hormonally for yourself with that super high protein version? Did you feel a difference in energy overall? Did you do any blood tests to check to see if levels
You
were
know,
dropping?
I looked a little bit at the glucose monitor. So I was looking at some blood glucose. I mean, I think, I would do periods of 3 to 5 days before I do a kind of a fat refeed. And I would notice probably by the end of the fourth, fifth day, right before I started to feel colder, a little less energy, a little less, I didn't want to do as much, again, and it's just, it just makes sense. You're just kind of not giving yourself quite enough. And so then I didn't let that go on too long because I wasn't like excited about that part. So I would add the fat in pretty quickly. Now, the problem I had early on was I was so hungry for fat. I mean, I was just gorging. It'd be like an 8,000 calorie day refeed. And I was doing a lot of dairy, because
Yeah.
dairy fat is very easy to eat and particularly overeat. And so I had to sort of, as I switched over to more, different sources of fat, like the beef fat and egg yolks and, some of these things, pork belly, which is, pretty tasty.
Yeah.
Um, that was a little, that resulted in me eating less fat. And so the refeeds worked a little better that way. So that's what I did there. But yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have that now on the higher fat approach where I'm, cold or, getting that hunger. I'm pretty satisfied. So that's, makes it more sustainable.
Yeah. And when you did the high fat approach, were you doing like a modified version where you were eating lower calories for that whole time, or were you kind of cycling back and forth with your calories?
I'm sorry, that was in which approach, the high fat or the?
The high fat, were you keeping your calories really low, or were you bumping it up and going back down?
I was generally keeping them fairly low, just because I was really looking at, I was trying to follow this Newberg protocol to see how long it took my blood glucose, and they ended up in the 60s, which was pretty low, So I mean, I was just kind of seeing how long. So I would do, a week or so at a time, and then I would eat a little bit more, and then I would do it again. I just kind of did that for about a month or so, and at the same time, I was asking some of the diabetics in the group to see if they wanted to do that. And pretty much they all saw their blood glucose drop pretty significantly. So, I mean, I think there's some definite merit to that approach, and like I said, I think it's obviously not sustainable being on a low calorie approach forever, but and Newberg called this the desugarization process, which I
Ah,
thought was a great term. I mean,
yeah.
it doesn't sound very scientific, but it's really what they were doing. They were just taking the sugar out of the people. And I think what's happening was, one, you're not providing as much, well, the calories are there, but you're not providing as much gluconeogenic potential,
Mm.
because you've got limited protein, not many calories of fat, which is difficult to convert into glycogen anyway. And then, over time, that just, you just see that sugar fall. And then, in addition to that exercise, I included some exercise in there. I think there's different types of exercise you can do to further refine that technique. And, that's what I was playing with as well. So
So now you're kind of still staying in that higher fat camp, but I've seen some of your meals. You've started to ramp it back up and add more and more back in, right?
yeah, yeah. So like for instance, this morning I had a big old ribeye and a dozen eggs, six of which were yolks, and the other six were the full eggs. And I had some sausage or some liver. No, was Braunschweiger, which is still a higher fat. I'll probably have some higher fat stuff later today. So yeah, I mean, I'll probably like today, like I said, I'll probably come in 3,500 to 4,000 calories with about 200 grams of protein or somewhere in there, somewhere in that range. So that's going to be about 80% typically.
Are you noticing a difference with your energy, your blood glucose, those markers at all?
Yeah, I mean, they're all, the energy's fine. I've been doing a lot of walking,
Mm.
with work and stuff. Like yesterday, I walked 15 miles, for instance. I just kind
Wow.
of, it was kind of, I had no problem with energy plus a couple workouts. And so, I mean, I have plenty of energy. Blood glucose numbers are not as low as when I was on 1,000 calories a day, but they're still very, 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 very reasonable. And so that's in very good, sort of glycemic variability. So,
Wonderful.
yeah, that's, like I said, I like eating 4,000 calories a hell of a lot better than I like eating at 1,000 calories.
I mean, I'm a woman who's like 5'6", 5'7", and eating 1,000 calories a day for me sounds, I just couldn't do it. I don't think I'd be able to function.
Well, like I said, this was an experiment I did. It's not something it wasn't a long-term plan. It was just kind of, again, I'm just trying to help out some other people, and it's good to know what's sustainable, what's not, how your body feels. And, I'm trying to, like I said, help solve this diabetic issue, because that's one of the things that we see a lot of.
It's huge. And, I think a lot of people hear about the carnivore diet and they want to try the carnivore diet that maybe suffer with diabetes. Either most of what I'm sure that you see is type 2 diabetes, but now we're starting to see people with type 1 diabetes wanting to try out the carnivore diet. And I'm just hearing from some of those people that they also do really well when they go in with that high fat approach rather than, doing the higher amounts of protein. Are you seeing that mirrored in the MeatRX community as
Yeah,
well?
pretty much. Yeah, I'd say so. I think what I see, the type ones, obviously it's a little different situation. Um, we see a lot of type ones with just wonderfully, beautifully controlled hemoglobin A1Cs and really flat CGMs. I've seen type ones with a hemoglobin A1C of 4.3,
Wow.
4.6, 4.9, pretty routinely, which I think is just, most endocrinologists would be doing backflips to see that, but we're seeing that pretty routine. We've got a couple of type 1 diabetics that claim that they've come off their insulin, which is, it's questionable whether it's actually occurring now if they really were type 1 diabetics. But regardless, they are seeing really, really good blood sugar control with this, probably the best in their life. The type 2s, I think what you see is, particularly early on, as they are so metabolically, not working well. I mean, they've got this, obviously if they're insulin resistant, either they have either not enough insulin they're not producing, or whatever insulin they're making isn't very effective. And so what we see with protein, initially I was thinking, well, maybe it's gluconeogenesis, but gluconeogenesis is a really, really slow process. So when you eat a meal of protein, let's say you eat a big fat, big giant steak, it's got a lot of protein, 100 grams of protein. Any glucose spike you see after that is not going to be typically from gluconeogenesis, because it's going to take 3 or 4 hours for that protein to work its way past the stomach and then start getting absorbed. But what you do see is protein will stimulate some of the incretin hormones, which are in the upper GI tract, which will in turn cause a glucagon response. And when you have glucagon and insulin, but when you stimulate both glucagon and the insulin doesn't work very well, you get mostly glucagon. And one of the jobs of glucagon is to break down sugar in the liver, glycogenolysis. And then you see this big bump in blood sugar. And so this is why this higher fat approach, I think, works well, is because, you're not stimulating glucagon as much because you're lower protein, and you don't have as much glycogen to start with because you just haven't provided those gluconeogenic precursors. So really, if you think about gluconeogenesis, it's really occurring slowly throughout the day and then overnight.
Overnight.
So
Yeah.
so you fill up the liver when you wake up with a relatively full liver, and then you as a diabetic, you get that morning, dawn effect where, your counter-regulatory hormones are bumped up, the glucagon, the cortisol, and then that tells your liver, hey, let's release that glycogen. And then you see that blood sugar surge, and it kind of tends to creep up there throughout the morning and kind of peaks around, for many people, around noon, it seems. And then they start to drop, and you become more insulin sensitive through the evening. So that sometimes can help you, with maybe when to exercise, when to eat. There's some diurnal things that might make things work a little better with regard to that.
Yeah, it was when I was doing a higher protein carnivore, I was wearing a CGM. And what made me switch over was that I would see my blood sugars in the night go up 30, 40 points starting at like 11 p.m. I'd go to bed and it'd be, 80. And then in my sleep, it would peak around 1:30. And then I'd wake up and it'd be at 90 or 100. And then it'd go down during the day. But after I would eat a big meal, it didn't really do much of anything. I'd eat a couple pounds of ribeye in one sitting and it wouldn't do anything really. But until I went to sleep, then I would see it start to creep up, 30, 40 points in my sleep. And then I would find that I was waking up a lot at night and then unable to go back to sleep as well. So that's why I love the CGMs. I think they're so valuable because I think people, they think they're going to see those numbers jump immediately after they eat something because they're used to being in that glucose metabolism. But yeah, that gluconeogenic process is just so much slower.
Yeah, and it's I just interviewed Don Layman. I don't know if you who Don Layman is.
Oh yeah.
Yesterday, I think, and he talks about that with higher protein. You're seeing an upregulation in glucose production at night. It's unclear if that's truly deleterious or not. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, that's a one thing about these CGMs where everybody's looking at this and we don't know absolutely if that's a bad thing or not yet. I mean, I think that's the one thing we have to be cautious about. Again, I'm it's nice to have new data. It's nice to be able to interpret things. Does it exactly correlate with damage? We're not sure. 130 is, not out of the normal physiologic range. Most people say, 140 plus is when you start seeing issues. And, like for instance, if I exercise really, really hard, my blood glucose is going to go up. Our hepatic output of glucose goes up like 15 times when we're exercising at high intensity. So if you see your blood glucose goes up from exercise, does that mean it's a bad thing?
No.
And the question is, it went up higher, it must be bad, I shouldn't exercise. So we have to really, just kind of be a little bit circumspect and step back with the nuance and say, these behaviors, clearly exercise is good for us, but it makes my blood glucose go up. Does that mean it's bad? So we don't know for sure, but I like I said, I think it's interesting. It's new data that we're learning. What's the best diet? Again, I often go back because I know we like to get hung up on numbers.
Yeah.
CGM, I think, is a good tool. It can be used well. Some people will obsess about that and become something anxiety provoking. And it's like, did that improve your quality of life or not? I mean, it might tell you, hey, don't eat, a bunch of, Doritos or something
Right.
like that, whatever. I mean, and that's already common sense. So I think does it change behavior? And that's the question. Because people still deal with addictions, and like I said, we have lots of metrics that say, hey, you're not, you can look at your belly. Hey, I got a big bunch of belly fat. That's probably better than a CGM, right? But people still don't change their behavior. So what's going to actually change their behavior? And one thing I like about the carnivore diet is that it kind of gives you that physiological freedom. You just don't have those cravings, and we're talking about sugar addiction or carb addiction or whatever you want to call it. You can take somebody who's a carbaholic and slap a CGM on them and they'll look at it and they'll say, oh, wow, eating that birthday cake made my blood glucose go up. Surprise, surprise. Like I didn't already know that was going to happen. Right.
Right.
But the question is, what do? They just stop looking at a CGM because they don't want to know.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, it's interesting stuff, but I still go back to, the basics, how you look, feel, perform, all those things as being the more meaningful metrics to me personally.
I agree. I mean, I think symptomology is everything. And for me, it was the other reason I switched over to a high fat approach was that my hormones were just not, it was in the toilet. I was going into early menopause at 40, 41 and going high fat. And I had to stop all the fasting too, because that's a really trendy thing in the carnivore keto community. But as soon as I quit fasting and I upped that fat, everything hormonally went right back into place. And, here I am 8 months later, I've had a regular cycle every single month and ovulated for the last 8 months. And that wasn't even true when I did standard carnivore, but it wasn't true when I was trying to do paleo and all these other diets for years and years before. So it's like my hormones now and the way that I feel is so much better. So my CGM, yeah, that data, like you said, we don't necessarily know if that's good or bad, but we have to go by those metrics of, hormonally, how do we feel how are we performing? Are we able to be around our family and friends, and not be a jerk because we're not feeling well?
Yeah, no, I think that's a just the wise way to look at things. I think what I think is fatty meat is a default setting, and all these other things we sometimes have to adjust. Like I said, if you eat, and again, when I go back and look at anthropology, I think we just don't have enough fat. I mean, the meat we have at the store, even the ribeyes are like the only problem. Ribeyes are not fatty enough, in my view, a lot of times because I think we probably were eating. I mean, I'm not alone in that. I think many anthropologists would agree we were eating big giant megafaunal mega herbivores, which were very very fatty animals like elephants, mastodons, and so on and so forth. And so I think that's the default setting is a higher fat approach. I don't think we were fasting all that often, quite honestly. I mean, I think what people like to do is they point to traditional societies of hunter gatherers. And I mean, in all honesty, these people are living, hand to mouth, starving, subsistence lives. And I think, we go back far enough, 100,000, 150,000 years ago, and we were just eating our fill every day, once we because we had plenty of animals to kill and we were very good at doing that. And then those animals ran out. And then we got into this feast or famine, crop failure type of stuff. But I don't think fasting was a normal part of much of humanity. In fact, I don't think we could have developed the large brain we have
Yeah.
had we been constantly fasting, because I think, it was such an energy requirement. So I think having a steady, constant supply of energy rich food, i.e., animal fat, was what ultimately helped us to develop this large brain and evolve into who we are today.
Yeah, I agree. And I've kind of talked a lot about, I've gotten a lot of flack for it because it's almost kind of contra what's popular right now is a lot of fasting, and people are doing it all the time and say they have great benefits from it. But for me and a lot of other women I've talked to, it's definitely not proven to be beneficial. And I agree with you. I don't think our society would have, continued to evolve, because when you're fasting, the first place that the blood flow shuts off is your reproductive organs. So that process begins to downregulate before anything else happens. And so it kind of makes you question the whole, that whole thing of we evolved doing all this fasting. It's another controversial topic.
Well, I think the I mean, I think the term fasting, I mean, I think we weren't eating a lot of meals. I don't think we were eating every 3 hours. I mean, I think
Yeah.
probably we probably ate a big giant meal once, maybe twice a day.
Right.
So some people would call that intermittent fasting, which I think, I tend to call it physiologic fasting, where
Yeah.
you're just not hungry. And, I mean, if you're not hungry, don't eat. But if you're hungry, eat. And I think that's probably more, I mean, I can imagine as a nomadic population, walking around and somebody at the back of the line says, "Hey, every 2 hours I need to stop and eat." I mean, it wouldn't go
You're
over
out.
too well, right? I mean, what do we got to build a fire every 2 hours, or I mean, it just. I, so I think I think when we're talking about fasting, I usually consider things like multi-day fasts and those types of things. And I think again, you have populations. We have people that are so, for lack of a better word, messed up metabolically, obesity wise, where those people do obtain some benefit. But I think over a period of time, finding a more natural pattern to eat is, and letting your appetite dictate. Because when I talk to the fasting guy, I would say, why am I hungry? What is the point of having an appetite? And the obvious answer is because you need to eat something, right? I mean, that would make sense to me as how we were designed. That's how every other animal on the planet does it. When they're hungry, they eat.
Right.
Some people point to, well, lions aren't successful in their kills and therefore, but it's not because they don't want to eat, and I think that humans were very successful hunters. We clearly were. And again, that's why we have the big fat brain that we have. So, I do see that people do overeat even on a carnivore diet. I've seen people, I've seen the high fat approach where people overeat too much fat. So I think that's a caveat we have to realize. You can't just gorge on unlimited amounts of fat. And again, I'll point to things like dairy, particularly when people start adding sweeteners to dairy, and then that becomes, then you're back to the keto fat bombs and cheesecakes and where you can. And I love that. So when I was on a keto diet, I love that. I
Right.
look for that stuff, and I would eat, got giant amounts of it because I could.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to overeat that stuff. So you have to be careful, even on a high fat approach.
Oh yeah, I mean, when I went high fat, I gained weight, and I see a lot of people gaining weight because it is so dense. And I don't know if you experienced this when you tried high fat, but for me, it's a different kind of a full feeling than if I was going to go and do a standard, higher 2 pounds of meat per day approach versus a high fat. I would have to kind of sit and wait for a little bit for that feeling of satiety to kick in. It wasn't just like I have the volume feeling that just comes when you eat that volume of food. So for me, it was self-control. Like I just gotta wait. It'll kick in, but just stop.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to look at it because you are right. I mean, you're not going to get that gastric stretch response by eating, concentrated fat. It's just not going to happen. But if you do just say, I'm going to eat this proportion of food, eat it, and then just kind of, like you said, just wait a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm not really hungry anymore. I
Yeah,
mean, but some people, they become dependent upon this gastric stretch receptor to tell them when they're full. And it's like, well, I'm not really full until my stomach hurts, or something like that. And this is kind of what more of a plant-based approach where you just gorge and gorge and gorge on low nutrient quality, high volume food. And you're not really absorbing much. You're not taking many calories, and you're being stuffed. But then as soon as that passes, you're hungry again. Whereas a high fat approach, it may be 10, 12, 16, 18, 24 hours before you're hungry again. And I
yeah.
think that's a different type of satiety. I think it's a good way to put it.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit, this is the last thing I'll ask you about. In MeatRX, you have different groups, I guess, for different types of people. You have addiction recovery groups, you've got, diabetes groups. Tell me a little bit about that specialization that you guys are starting to form, and some of the successes you've seen with those different groups.
Yeah, I mean, as we grow in membership number, just the more people, they're all going to have different reasons. I mean, some people, many people are coming to lose weight. There's other people that want to perform athletically. And then there's diabetics and people with autoimmune disease and gut health issues and people that are suffering from mental health disorders. So we have, different meetings for all of them. Some of them are multiple times a week. We generally most days have 5, 6, 10 meetings a day. So you can tune in, get online with 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 of people that are in your kind of peer group, and you can kind of share experiences, relate things. Usually we have one of our coaches leading those meetings to kind of, make sure no one's in there selling BS, like
Yeah.
by my silliness.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, but again, that's one of the things that I think is key for really any intervention, particularly this diet, because most people are not supported when they go on a carnivore diet because there's so much negative press out there about, oh my gosh, you're eating meat. Well, you're a murderer. You're killing the planet. You're going to have a heart attack. So you get this negative reinforcement all the time. It's hard to be successful in that situation. In fact, when I did a survey on 12,000 people doing a carnivore diet, we could definitely tie in the level of support with their outcomes. And the people that had more support just had a better outcome, which intuitively makes sense. And so when you have a group you can turn to, and it might not be your family, it might not be your coworkers or
No.
that things, we have a community of people that are going through the same thing. They can share tips, they can keep each other accountable, they can share successes, they can talk to any difficulties they've had and how they've overcome those things. And you've got some of those other things on social media. The problem I see, like for instance, like in a Facebook group, somebody will post something, 2 or 3 per respond, and then it'll immediately devolve into disagreements and name
Yes.
calling.
Yes.
You see that the whole time,
Yeah.
and we don't have that in our community. Our community is all about support, all about moving the needle forward. And what people are willing to say face to face when they look each other in the eye is very different than what they'll do as an anonymous person on social media. So I think we get rid of some of the social media has some good things, but it has a lot of negativity. We kind of filter out and get rid of that negativity there. So it's a really nice, I think, a better way to go. And plus, you know, what we seeing more and more in some of the social media stuff is that there's certainly be a censorship of the message around different health issues, about political issues, health issues. And so, you're being fed, like, how many plant-based ads are you being fed
Oh
on
yeah.
social media? How many controversial topics are just being deleted
Yeah.
or being banned? And I don't necessarily, I use the coronavirus. I don't necessarily agree with every conspiracy theory out there, or whether we're, get into this mask, no mask stuff. but I think the discourse should be allowed to happen.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if not, it's obviously suppression of speech. So
Yeah.
whether you disagree don't or not, you shouldn't say we're just going to censor you and shut you down because you have a different opinion. Because you'll see that, and we already do see that to some degree in this meat-based community where people will just we've seen that the censorship. So that's one of the things about MeatRX. We don't have to worry about that. We're our own standalone platform. We're not giving Mark Zuckerberg another $25 billion that he gets every year. We're hopefully, and we as we grow as a community, not only are we working on health, but we're also have some agendas we want to do, which is help with the landscape with regard to animal agriculture, animal welfare,
Yes.
keeping meat in the diet, not letting it, because I don't want to see my kids forced to or brainwashed into thinking, well, we got to eat this fake food,
Yeah.
and we know what happens. I mean, they just get depression, autoimmune issues. They don't do as well nutritionally. So I mean, it's an important, I think, thing we're doing.
I think so too. And, I agree with you. The Facebook groups, I think that, from my sample survey of talking to people who are just in my community, that they can be so dogmatic and people start, this is what I love about MeatRX and this community feel is that it's so supportive. And from my observations as well, just kind of peeking in there and seeing what people are doing, instead of attacking someone for having a problem or deleting them out of the group or turning into this bullying situation, what I see in MeatRX is that you guys are really there to support people and help them troubleshoot, walk through these problems and not give them like a one size fits all answer. That's my biggest problem with a lot of these Facebook groups and even, Instagram as well. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not out there saying all vegetables are poison. I think that doesn't help. That just makes you look like a wacko.
Right.
You can be more nuanced and subtle and said, hey, there's compounds in plants that some people don't tolerate well. I think that, but you get some people out there saying, my way or the highway, meat and water is life, and it's the only thing. And I've never even said that. And I friggin' wrote the carnivore book. Even if you read my book, I talk about, some people will include certain carbohydrates for athletic performance, and you figure out what you can add in and stuff like that. Again, it's not a religion, it's not a dogma. It's do what's going to work for you, be sustainable in the long term, and focus on your health.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's when I'm in the meetings, and I certainly acknowledge that there are people that need to be very strict,
Yeah.
and some of those people are very content and very happy, but we understand that there's other people that maybe don't need that or don't want to do that
Yeah.
or are just as well off with a little more variety, and that's fine too. There's some people out there demonizing, you know, oh, one of the common, more recent ones is don't eat pork because it's got higher concentrations of polyunsaturated fatty acids. I'm
Yeah.
like,
And chicken, don't eat chicken.
yeah, I mean, it's just there's no real human data that supports that. I mean, there's theoretical stuff, and this has this fatty acid ratio. I'd say, well, look, pork is, and I don't eat a lot of pork, just to put that out there, but pork is the number one consumed animal in the world. There's no other animal that's eaten more than pork, and most of it's consumed in Asia. And
Yes.
most of these Asian populations that we look at, Japan, Taiwan,
Okinawans.
Hong
Yeah.
Kong, these people live a long time and they don't have the disease that we have here. And
Yeah.
so to pin that on, saying that is like, well, the human data doesn't really support that. So I tend to push back on these sort of proclamations that people are out there making.
I totally agree. And I think it doesn't do anything but create more division. And the message that I'm trying to spread on my channel, and I know that you're trying to spread with MeatRX, is that the human body thrives on these animal foods, on fats, on getting that adequately in our diet. And I mean, I can say as an ex-vegan, I was vegan for a couple of years and then tried to do just a plant-heavy version of paleo for many years after veganism. I was still afraid of meat. It was like until I kind of put myself onto the carnivore diet and started following people like yourself and just kind of nose diving right into it, listening to all these podcasts. It's taken me almost 2 years now to just stop being afraid of eating fat and eating meat. But my health, like I said, at 41 hormonally, I'm in better shape than I was at 35. It's remarkable. So I think that being dogmatic and making us afraid of pork and chicken and it's just the wrong thing. If you want to go and eat some handfuls of blueberries every now and then, if it makes you feel better, great. But your diet should be based on the animal foods, and getting that into your body adequately, I think, is the bigger message. So I appreciate you for not being dogmatic and not scaring people away from these things that we just really don't have evidence to support at all.
Yeah, I think the barrier for entry should not be high. I mean, I think, like I said, it's the same thing. And while I have, I just got done doing a podcast with Alan Williams, who's, a huge guy in regenerative agriculture, wonderful, wonderful guy. And, I mean, that is going to make a big difference in how we go. But at the same time, there's people that say, well, I can only afford ground beef from Walmart. And, that means I can't do the diet, right? I have to have grass finished. I'm like, not at all.
Mm.
The evidence doesn't support that from what I've seen, and like I said, I've probably got data on more people doing the carnivore diet than anybody else. So, I mean, when I see people saying that, oh, you're eating that poison meat, that I think that also it doesn't serve people well, because you're excluding a whole bunch of people that may not be able to afford some of these other meats. Now, like I said, I think if you do research, you can make it more affordable,
Yeah.
but you still may not be able to do that. And so I think it's not helpful to make these proclamations about this or that, or saying you must do it this way, or if you're not eating, X amount of organ meats a week, you're going to be not optimal. I mean, the data just doesn't support that so
Right.
far. And I always say, well, show me the clinical trial that proves what you say. And there's none of that. At least I'm trying to get one done. One of the things with the study that being done by Harvard University, which we talked about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
I made sure that because they wanted my input, and I said, make sure you ask about grass finish versus grain finish, because I think it's an important distinction so we can have data. Now, I've often said, I hope the data comes out showing that grass finished, particularly regeneratively finished animals, show tremendous health benefits. I mean, I hope that's the case. But until those studies are done and until that data is available, I can't say that. But if it ever does come out, that I'll be certainly happy to cite those studies and say, hey, look, we know that a regeneratively raised animal increases the likelihood of success for diabetes by 20%. If that ever comes out, I'm happy to say that. But until that time, I mean, the data I've collected shows really no difference in the outcomes. And so I think we have to realize that for now. And then, it doesn't mean we shouldn't push for those things from environmental reasons, which I think are very, very valid. But from a health standpoint, that's where veganism is.
Yeah.
Veganism is dogma, and
Yes.
everything, whether it's true or not, we're going to pretend that it matches our dogma. And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
it's nice to have a message, but you can't compromise the objectivity, to get that message out there, I think.
I agree. I agree. Well, I feel like I could just talk to you for another hour here, but I know we both have places to go and things to do. So I just really appreciate your time, Shawn. And I'm going to put all the links for MeatRX and for your clinical trial and how people can get in touch with you below the video. But I really do appreciate your time here today.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity. Hopefully, we got something accomplished here, and thanks for all what you do. I mean, like I said this is something that the more people get out there and talk about this, the more people will reach, and eventually there'll be a tipping point, and I think we'll start to change the narrative, because I think it has to. I think it really
I
does.
agree. I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you.